Hello everyone, I'm your hostess with the mostest, 8-Second Gaming. In today's video, we are going to be talking about how to play every single legend in Apex. We're going to be talking about their roles, their goals in fights, and also maybe even give you some advice on what kind of weapons to run. But while some of these descriptions might be a little bit brief, if you're really getting inspired to play a new character, then you need to check out the GameLeap website after this. Over there, we have top-level coaches, including myself, creating the best, most highly informative guides to make you the best player you can possibly be. We have legend guides, gun guides, VOD reviews, and much more. So no matter what you struggle with or are looking to improve, we have solutions for you. So click the link in the description, pick yourself up a membership, and start to improve today. But okay, with that done, let's hop into things. And yes, these are going to be somewhat brief because we can't really go too in depth with every single legend. It's just going to make the video way too long. So let's start things off with Ashe. And Ashe is a very weird legend to start off with because she actually does fit into two different roles. She can be a secondary fragger and an entry fragger, though she does fit the secondary fragger role a little bit better. When you're playing as Ashe, you are looking to take off angles and lock down a single person on the enemy team with your tactical. That allows you and or your team to easily dive on them and make it a 3v2 insanely easily. Ashe is also really good at taking off angles because she does have the use of her portal. You can use the portal to either take an off angle, or once you're on the off angle, you can use it to get back to your team if they're looking to hard engage. There's a lot of options when it comes to off angling as Ashe, so use the portal at your own discretion. And if you're looking to play a character like this, you're definitely going to want to pick guns that work well in medium and close ranges because of the off angling potential that you have. My personal go-to would be an SMG and an assault rifle. But now we can move into the next legend, that is going to be Ballistic. Now, Ballistic is a secondary fragger, and his job in fights is a lot different than other secondary fraggers because he wants to be in the thick of it. With Ballistic, you're going to want to pop your ult to help your teammates, and then you basically are going to be running right next to the entry fragger. You're not going to be giving them a ton of time to really do entry fragger things because you're going to be right there with them. This is where a lot of people actually get a little bit confused because a lot of people seem to think that Ballistic is an entry fragger, but he's not. He's a secondary fragger that likes to be in the thick of it. The reason that Ballistic is not an entry fragger is because he doesn't have any movement abilities to help him get out of fights like entry fraggers typically do. Let your entry fragger take most of the heat as they start to run up because they have a way to get out of the fight. You are just there to clean things up, and with your smart pistol, you can make it so that people aren't really able to fight back as soon as you get up close and personal with them. And Ballistic does have the option of 3 different weapons, so there's a lot of dealer's choice that goes on when you want to pick a loadout. But keep in mind, most of your fights as Ballistic are going to be up close and personal, so when picking a loadout, have guns that work well in that range. My personal go-to, again, is going to be an SMG and an assault rifle, but in the sling, I like to throw a Havoc because a turbocharged Havoc is really good up close and also in medium range distances, so you have everything covered. Moving on to our next legend, though, we've got Bangalore, and Bangalore is now an entry fragger. Before, she used to be a secondary fragger, but the meta has changed, and she has now slotted herself into this role. And Bangalore is highly aggressive, especially right now in the meta. Bangalore smokes can do so much to cut off enemy teams' line of sight, and you can easily single people out with this. You can cut people off from their team, you can cut rotations off, and if you have a bunch of digi threats available on your team, you can throw them on top of the enemy and cut off their line of sight completely and allow you to just rain domination on them. Because of Bangalore's highly aggressive playstyle, you are going to be looking to rock weapons that are very good in these ranges. This is actually one of the very few legends that you can get away with 2 up close and personal weapons like a shotgun and an SMG. Though if you do plan on running that, just keep in mind you are not going to be as useful in the medium ranges. So if you still want to have that option, you could potentially throw a Volt as your SMG because the Volt is actually a very stable SMG, so you can use it in medium ranges. Bangalore is a very simple legend. She's very straightforward, so let's move into our next one, and that's going to be Bloodhound. Bloodhound is a secondary fragger, and they're all about getting information to their team. It doesn't matter if you are actually in a fight or not, because if you're not in a fight, you could just be scanning the White Ravens or checking footprints to see where people are. The information that Bloodhound gives is extremely important in every single fight and every single part of the game. What separates a bad Bloodhound and a good Bloodhound is actually when they start to use their scans, because the scans are not as good as they used to be. Timing the scans in fights is very crucial, so as a Bloodhound player, if you can give accurate callouts as to where the enemy team is, then do not waste your scan. Wait until you lose line of sight or your team really needs that scan. Because if you throw it out and you don't have it when the enemy team starts to move, then you could be caught in a really bad position. And while Bloodhound does have a fantastic ultimate that does allow them to get up close and personal, you're not going to be in the thick of it for the majority of the fights. You are going to be in a little bit more of a medium distance. So when picking a loadout, have that reflected. My go-to would be a shotgun like the EV8 because when you do pop that ultimate, you can get on top of somebody very easily and just absolutely dominate them. And the second weapon would be an assault rifle, probably something like the Nemesis or the Hemlock because they have very strong burst potential, but a 301 is perfectly acceptable as well. Bloodhound's actually the first character that I ever made in this game, so they're always going to have a special place in my heart. But now let's move into our next legend, Catalyst. And Catalyst is the first support legend that we're going to be talking about, and she is actually a lot different from the other ones because her goal is basically to funnel the enemies. It doesn't matter if you're fighting or setting up buildings, Catalyst's job is to make things as hard for the enemy as they possibly can. You want to put enemies in a tough position. You want them to start panicking when they try to fight you, because if they try to push a door, oh wait, that's Catalyst off. Do I kick it? Do I not kick it? What do I do? When enemies start to panic, that's when their calls get a little bit confusing to each other and they start to lose communication. And when they lose communication, that's when they start to make mistakes, and that's when you can really start to take advantage of things. As a support character though, you are mostly going to be in the back line holding things down. You are going to be anchoring for your team. But if push comes to shove, then you also need a very strong up close and personal weapon. So I really like the combination of a shotgun and a marksman rifle. It can be a little bit daunting to have two single fire weapons, but once you start to get the hang of it and really understand the ranges that they work well in, it will be perfectly fine. Now my go-to is always going to be the Mastiff, but right now the Mastiff and the PK are basically interchangeable. You can use whatever one you like better. So play around, see what works best for you. But now we can move into Caustic, and this is another support legend. And Caustic does have a few different ways that you can play him, but for the most part, you are basically just going to be anchoring. He can have a playstyle where you're a little bit more aggressive when you're starting to siege buildings, where you start to force people into bad spots. But as a Caustic player, you're going to be a lot more defensive usually. Caustic likes to play in zone. He likes to bunker up a building. That is where he is most comfortable. And always keep in mind that you have a very big hitbox when you are playing Caustic. So if you are being a little bit more aggressive, you have to keep in mind where cover is near you. I see way too many Caustics get caught out in the open because they just forget to play around cover. But as for the loadout, it's probably going to be very similar for each support because it's just the best idea for them to all run this. Going to be a marksman rifle and a shotgun. Moving on to our next legend though, we've got Crypto. And Crypto is a very unique character because he wants to just sit on his Game Boy all day. It doesn't matter what everybody else is doing because you just want to find a building in zone, set up your Game Boy and start to look around and wait for endgame. And once endgame does come, Crypto really starts to shine because you know exactly where everyone's playing, you know exactly where everyone's looking, and you can start to position yourself accordingly so that you are on the slower side of the ring. If you know where everybody's pressuring, you know where you need to go to not be pressured. And once the ring gets small enough that you can EMP 3 teams at once, then you are going to have so many free kills just sitting and waiting. Now, even though Crypto is a support character, he's one of the support characters that can get away with running a few different loadouts. Because you're not really going to be poking all game and you're not really going to be backlining for a lot of different fights, you can get away with more of an aggressive kit because you're basically just going to go for endgame. And once endgame circles happen, marksman rifles are not that strong. So as a Crypto player, you can get away with shotgun AR or SMG AR depending on your preferences. But if you get into a few more fights with your team, then you can definitely go with the shotgun marksman rifle and be perfectly fine as well. Moving into our next legend though, we've got Daddy Fuse. Now Fuse is definitely a harder one to play in the current meta. People are starting to pick him up because he can do well in some certain situations, but for the most part, you are going to be a little bit lackluster right now. That definitely could change in the future, and maybe it will. But when it comes to fights, Fuse wants to cause chaos. He wants to make it impossible for people to play certain spots. His knuckle cluster and his grenade launching abilities make it so that nowhere is safe for the enemy team to play. If they want to post up and start to do some damage at you, guess what? They can't do it anymore because there's a knuckle cluster on that spot. They have to move. And if they all group up in the same spot, you can drop your mother load on top of them and force them to play in one circle. Except for 90% of the legends have a way to get out of it on their own, and if they don't have a way to get out of it, then they can just walk out of it before the flames activate, but that's a different topic for a different video. As a Fuse player, you have to remember to not overly rely on your knuckle cluster though. I see way too many Fuse players tunnel vision on that and they actually get caught out because they don't have their weapon out. You have to remember that Apex is first and foremost a shooter, not an ability game. Only use your knuckle cluster or your grenade to force somebody to move after you have dealt a bunch of damage to them so you can finish off the kill. And that is definitely why you want to use 2 spray weapons to maximize your damage output during fights, no matter the range that you are in. SMG AR is the perfect combination to run on Fuse because no matter what your enemies are doing, you're going to have uptime damage just dealing at them. But we can move into our next legend, that is going to be the big man Gibby. Gibby is another support legend legend, and he is basically the poking king. As a Gibraltar player, you constantly want to be poking everyone to not only level up your Evo shield, but your teams as well, and be taking away meds. If you can poke a team for a long duration of time, you are probably going to be coming out on top because his gun shield gives you 75 free HP that you can just do whatever you want with, and it recharges on its own. And when it comes to actual fights, Gibby is basically just an anchor for his team. He holds down a spot until you want to hard commit on a fight, and then he hops in with his bubble. As a Gibraltar player, you have to be good at bubble fighting, because if you let somebody else take control of the bubble fight, then you are doing something completely wrong. Hop into the firing range, play around with some friends, get good at bubble fighting, and then go back into ranked. But because bubble fighting is so important, you absolutely have to run a shotgun. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The best are definitely going to be the PK and the Mastiff. The Eva can be good at a bubble fight, but it's not as good as the Mastiff or the PK because you want that big bonk stick that you can peek in and out with. And that's why your loadout is very simple. It's the standard support one. You want to have the shotgun for the bubble fights, and you want to have the marksman for your poke battles. Gibby is very straightforward, so let's move into our next one. That's going to be Horizon. Now, Horizon in fights is very straightforward. You either want to take high ground on the team if it's available by using your gravity lift, or you want to use your gravity lift to throw your black hole, suck them in, and just throw a bunch of grenades at them. Fights with Horizon revolve around the gravity lift. This tactical is insanely strong in fights. And although they have nerfed it a bunch of times, they're trying to take away its usefulness, it still is very good in a lot of different situations. Now, as a Horizon player, yes, you are going to be very aggressive in fights, being up close and personal in some cases, but if you are taking high ground away from teams, you need to have a medium range weapon potentially in order to take those off angles. So SMG assault rifle, best in slot here. But now we can move into our next legend. That's going to be Lifeline. And Lifeline is a combat medic, so yes, she is a support. Her goal in fights is to stick next to one of her teammates, probably a secondary fragger, because it's a little bit easier to stay close to them than the entry fragger. If your teammate goes down, then you need to be there to pick them up almost instantly and keep enemies off that are trying to thirst them. That's a lot easier said than done, yes I know, because sometimes your teammates don't go down to the best of spots and it's very hard to keep them from getting thirsted. But that's why as a Lifeline player, you need to have weapons that deal damage very consistently. You can't really have single fire weapons because you need the damage uptime. So as a Lifeline player, even though she is a support, I do recommend that you run an SMG and an assault rifle to keep your team from being thirsted because you have the damage potential. If you're running single fire weapons, then there's too much downtime between bullets potentially, and the enemy team can get the thirst off. Moving into our next legend though, we've got Loba. And Loba's another one of the legends that has moved their role. They were a support legend, but now they actually slot better into the secondary fragger role. And Loba is very much like Ashe. You want to take hard off angles because you have a very strong mobility ability to get you from point A to point B. The bracelet is good at a lot of different things, and it can get you out of a lot of different situations as well. And even though it might seem like Loba is still a support because she does have the black market, it's still a very good secondary fragger ability as well because it allows you to stay aggressive in fights. If you're taking hard aggressive off angles to pin down the enemies while your team moves up, but you're running low on ammo, you could just slam down a black market next to you and not have to worry about leaving your position in order to get ammo. And also your playstyle doesn't have to change depending on what team you're running, because if you want to play Edge, Loba can do that, but if you want to play Zone, Loba can do that as well. Loba's a very flexible secondary fragger when it comes to playstyle. But again, as a hard off angling secondary fragger, you're definitely going to be looking for weapons that have good damage uptime. And as we mentioned in the past, that's probably going to be an SMG and an assault rifle. They're just the best options here. The assault rifle is really good for off angling, and when you have to go help your team, the SMG has really good up close potential. But now we can move into our next legend. That is going to be Mad Maggie. Now Mad Maggie is basically like a combination of Fuse and Ballistic. She is a highly aggressive secondary fragger, but like Ballistic, she wants to be basically right next to the entry fragger as they're entering the fight. You throw your wrecking ball, you immediately charge in because you want to be up close and personal. That is where she shines. And just like Fuse, you cause a lot of chaos and make it very hard for people to play certain spots. If you get somebody super low, but they manage to get around a corner or behind a piece of terrain to heal, then you can throw your riot drill and make it so that they have to move, allowing you to secure the kill. It doesn't matter what kind of situation you're in. If you're fighting, you want to be up close with Mad Maggie. And because of that highly aggressive nature, she is also one of the characters that can get away with a shotgun SMG to be up close and personal constantly. She also does synergize super well with shotguns because of her passive, allowing you to run a lot faster in certain situations. But my go-to for the shotguns would definitely be the Eva because it pairs well with the highly aggressive nature. But now we can move into our next character, and that is going to be Mirage. Now, Mirage is a very special case because Mirage actually doesn't fit into any specific role in the game. He's not an entry fragger, he's not a secondary fragger, and he's not a support. His character abilities are kind of all over the place. So you basically have to mesh your playstyle based on what your team needs at the time. Figure out what the team comp is missing and start to base your playstyle off of that. If your team is missing a support, then you need to play backline, anchor, and then use your res to potentially help your team out in those situations. If you're missing a secondary fragger, then throw your decoy in to cause some confusion and take an off angle. Or if you're missing an entry fragger, then you can run straight at the enemy team, pop your ultimate, cause a lot of chaos, and use that as a distraction for your team to push up and help you. And I do want to make this very clear, just because he can do all three things doesn't mean that you should be doing all three things. Remember, Mirage doesn't actually fit into a role. He doesn't do any of these roles better than any other legend. It's one thing that a lot of Mirage players seem to get wrong. But as for the loadout, I don't even know what to tell you. Again, it's just going to be based off of the playstyle and what your team needs. Mirage is a very weird character. So let's move into our next one, and that is going to be Newcastle. Now, Newcastle is actually one of my favorite legends in the game because he is the strongest support character in a lot of different situations, but not a lot of people seem to realize this. But as a Newcastle player, again, you're going to be a support character, so you are going to be in the back line. But unlike other support characters, Newcastle can be solo. Newcastle can take hard, aggressive off angles split from his team, and when the enemy team tries to single him out, he can just jump back to his team and be perfectly safe. You can be highly aggressive in a lot of different situations and be your own one-man wrecking crew. And because of that, you should not run the typical support loadout as a Newcastle player. You're definitely going to want to look for a more aggressive, friendly loadout. But you still want the shotgun because shotguns as a support player are just very strong. So run a Mastiff or a Peacekeeper and then an assault rifle. My go-to is always the Nemesis because it's just a very strong assault rifle and meshes well with his off-angling playstyle. But now we can move into Octane, and Octane's Octane. He's an entry fragger, he likes to go fast, he wants to be aggressive, he wants to be in your face. As an Octane player, you need to have very strong movement and a very strong understanding of how the fights in up-close situations work. You also can't be afraid to use your life as a resource because Octane using a stim is incredibly hard to hit. You get a 40% speed boost, so you are the fastest running character in the game when using it. You pop a stim and you have a good strafe, you are going to be damn near impossible to hit, allowing you to be a lot more aggressive than all other legends. And that is why Octane really benefits from using a highly aggressive loadout like a shotgun SMG. I've even seen people run 2 SMGs, or you can run SMG AR depending on what you like. Doesn't really matter as long as it's very aggressive and meshes with his playstyle. Alternatively, if you are good with the Wingman, you can use that because it is a pistol and gives you even better strafing ability. But the Wingman is very high risk, high reward, and has a high skill ceiling, especially on a character like Octane. So only use it if you are very, very good with it. But now let's swing into our next legend, that is going to be Pathfinder. And like Loba and Ashe, he is a secondary fragger that does take very hard, aggressive off angles. His grapple is insanely good at taking those because it doesn't matter if you need to get on the high ground or take an off angle at a certain time, because you can do it at a moment's notice. And if you need to push to a team or get your team to a new spot or get away with your team, you have your zip line that does have a pretty good cooldown because you just look at a care package and it gets refreshed instantly. Now, the only thing to keep in mind when you're playing Pathfinder in fights is that he has a huge hitbox that he does not have fortified. So whenever you can, avoid fighting up close and personal, and also try to avoid fighting indoors because again, it's going to be an issue for you. But other than that, don't really need to know anything about fighting with Pathfinder. And again, because he is a secondary fragger that takes off angles, you're probably going to want an SMG and an assault rifle. It's just the best loadout for them. But now we can move into our next legend, that is going to be Rampart. Now, Rampart is a support and her whole shtick is the walls. As a Rampart player, you basically need to learn to be invisible, because when a fight breaks out, you need to let your team take the full force of the attack while you slip off and start to set up your walls. Once you have those walls set up, you are going to be able to lay down so much cover fire and allow you to get a lot of different situations to turn because of this. Rampart walls can do so much random damage to people, it catches them off guard and allows you to have different opportunities for your entry fragger to re-engage. And worst case Ontario, you can just pull out Sheila and just mow people down. Now, Rampart actually does have a ton of different flexibility options when it does come to her loadout, because she does synergize well with LMGs, but LMGs aren't that strong. She also works really well with sniper rifles because the poking potential with her walls. She's good with ARs, she's good with SMGs. There's a lot of different flexibilities, so use whatever you are most comfortable with. Doesn't really matter with Rampart because she does mesh well with a lot of different weapons, so this one is just 100% dealer's choice. Moving into our next legend though, we've got Revenant. Now before Revenant got his rework, he was like Mirage, he didn't really fit a role on a team. But now with the rework and the Revenant Reborn, he is a secondary fragger through and through. And like Pathfinder, Loba, and Ashe, he is a hard off-angling secondary fragger. As a Revenant, your goal in fights is to split off from your team and look for side angles to provide openings for your entry fragger. If you can take that off angle and just get a lot of initial damage out, your entry fragger can take advantage of that and just completely turn the tide of the fight. And as Revenant, you can use your tactical to either jump to new spots or use it to catch up to your team when they hard engage. Revenant's tactical is basically like Loba Bracelet or Ashe Portal or Pathfinder Grapple. Does the exact same thing. But one thing that people have a lot of issues with when it comes to Revenant is his ultimate. A lot of people fall into the trap that this makes him an entry fragger because it gives him a little bit of extra health. This is not the case. Revenant is still a secondary fragger. You want to use the ultimate after your team enters the fight and you can jump to them with your ultimate active. It allows you to stay in the fight for elongated periods of time. Having that extra little bonus amount of health on top of something like a purple shield will make it so your enemies have to hard focus you in order to get you out of the fight. And even after they pump a bunch of bullets into you, you still have a shield that is going to be recharging very quickly. This makes it so they have to turn their entire attention onto you, allowing your support and your entry fragger to just easily clean up kills if done properly. Revenant allows for fights to be done a lot differently. But as a secondary fragger that takes hard off angles, could you guys take a guess as to what loadout you should be running? That's right, SMG, assault rifle, you guys know the deal. So let's move into our next legend, that's going to be Seer. Now Seer got hit hard with the nerf stick. He went to being a legend that you saw on literally every single team to having the lowest pick rate in the game. Honestly, right now at the time of recording this, if you want to play Seer, I just highly recommend switching to a different legend. If you like the scans, play Bloodhound. But if you are dead set on playing Seer and you really want to play him because you enjoy his kit, then your goal in fights is basically the same as Bloodhound. You are a secondary fragger that is going to just be gathering information for your team as the fight continues. You use your heartbeat sensor to figure out what people are, you use your tactical to show them off, and you use your ultimate to give you wall hacks when it is up. Information in fights is very strong, and Seer does give a ton of information out. There's not really a ton that I can say on Seer right now because he's just so weak. Your only real goal in fights is to just get some information out and then rely on your raw gun skill. And speaking of guns, let's talk about your loadout. Now Seer is a secondary fragger, so you're probably going to be wanting to run an assault rifle, but when it comes to your up close weapon, it's going to be your own personal choice. Do you want to run an SMG or do you want to run a shotgun? Which are you better with? Which are you more comfortable with? Figure that out for yourself and run that. But now we can dive into our next legend, that is going to be Valkyrie. And Valk is another legend that can fit the entry fragger role, but she can also fit the secondary fragger role. She is better as a secondary fragger, but depending on the team comp, she can be the entry fragger. It's very convoluted. But for the sake of this video, we are going to be talking about her as a secondary fragger because that is her main role. And as a secondary fragger, Valkyrie, you are going to be taking off angles in fights. You're going to be using your jetpack to take aggressive height angles. Whenever you can, you need to be taking away height from teams because height is king. Whenever you have high ground in a fight, you are more than likely going to win that fight because you just have so many better angles. And Valkyrie's jetpack allows you to traverse height very easily. There are some other legends that can take height like Revenant, Pathfinder, stuff like that, but they don't have the same control that Valkyrie does over themselves. Valkyrie's jetpack allows her to have so much different play, so you need to always be looking to use that whenever you can. But just like Fuse, don't tunnel vision on it. If you don't see anywhere that you can immediately use the jetpack, don't overly rely on it. You have to remember that this is a shooting game. You have to shoot your weapons. But because Valkyrie doesn't have an ability like Revenant or Pathfinder or Loba to get to her team very quickly when the fight breaks out, you need to have weapons that are very strong in the medium range. That's why I highly suggest running something like a Nemesis on her because it's just very strong and shreds in the medium range. But you can also run an SMG to allow you to have a little bit more flexibility in ranges, but still be good in close range. Nemesis R9 is probably my go-to whenever I run Valkyrie, so try it out and see how you like it. Moving into our next legend though, we've got Vantage, and Vantage is a support legend. A lot of people get this wrong. She is a support. But she's a unique support because she doesn't really have support abilities. Typically, a support has a way to either reset a fight or help control ground. Vantage just gives you information and has a sniper rifle. But the reason she is a support is because of her playstyle. In fights, you want to be in the back line marking people with your sniper rifle for your team to get the damage increase out. You also passively gather a ton of information, so you need to be calling that out for your team. When you scan somebody and see what kind of armor they have, give the call out for your team so you can try and focus somebody with the lowest armor. armor. If you can focus that person, you can easily make the fight from a 3v3 to a 3v2. But Vantage is also very strong at taking off angles because of Echo. So like Newcastle, she can be a little bit more solo oriented, but because of the nature of her playstyle, you are going to be a little bit more reliant on your team to help finish off kills. Now when it comes to your loadout, a lot of people get this wrong. They want to run a sniper rifle because it does mesh well with her playstyle, but you have a sniper rifle built in, so cover the other areas. You want to have something for up close, so run an SMG or a shotgun. And you want to have something for the medium ranges, so run an assault rifle. Any of the assault rifles work here, the Flatline 301, the Nemesis, the Hemlock, doesn't matter. I don't really recommend running a Havoc on her because the Havoc isn't super strong in medium ranges, it's more of a close range assault rifle. But if you have a turbocharger on it, it can work. But now we can move into the last support here, and that is going to be Watson. Now, yeah, I just said it. Watson's a support character, and her entire focus is taking away ground from enemy teams. She's one of the legends that controls areas because she has her fences, and she also has her generator to make it so you can't be naded out. As a Watson player, you want to basically just find an area, set up your fences, and just sit and hang out until endgame. But in fights, you're a typical support. You hold down the back line, you poke, you do some damage, you allow your team to have some openings, and then when the going gets tough, you go in and you have the up close personal fight with them. She's very straightforward, she's very typical, she's very easy. I love Watson. And for her, you definitely want to run the typical support loadout of shotgun and marksman rifle. It's just very strong in this type of support. And now we made it to the last legend, and that is going to be Wraith. Now Wraith is an entry fragger through and through. If you're playing Wraith, you need to be the first one into the fight. You need to take the heat off your teammates. You need to be comfortable and confident in those solo opportunities because that is what she does. She can play highly aggressive and highly split from her team unlike any other legend because she has a built-in get out of jail free card. If something goes wrong, you just phase and run back to your team. And if you want to play really split, you can throw a portal down and then be able to jump back to your team at a moment's notice if something does go sideways. Wraith is a very solo oriented playstyle that does help the team out because entry fraggers are always going to be strong. But even though you are an entry fragger, it doesn't mean that you're going to be super aggressive every single fight. So you do have options when it comes to your loadout. Now, me personally, I like the SMG assault rifle on Wraith, but because of her aggressive nature, you can run an SMG wingman. Now again, the wingman is a very high risk, high reward gun, so only use that if you are very confident with it. If you're starting to miss shots with the wingman, then you're going to be losing a lot of different fights, so it's not worth it. It's probably better to just pick something like an AR. But let me know your main in the comments down below. And if you guys want to stay up to date with the latest greatest Apex Legends tips, tricks, and news, don't forget to smash the like and subscribe button. Thanks so for watching once again, mates, and game, and I'll see you guys in the next one.